We're looking at a piece of source material that gives us a really hands-on technique,
Hmm.
something for boosting your English fluency and maybe, dialing in those specific sounds of the American accent.
That's right. And this source, it focuses on a method called shadowing. It actually walks you through it using a very concrete example.
Would you?
Just a
Oh,
short, pretty everyday voicemail message. And the great thing is, it doesn't just play the message and say, copy this.
right.
It really dissects it, line by line. It points out all these crucial, sometimes subtle details about pronunciation and intonation.
Okay, so that's our mission today then, to kind of pull apart that source's guide to shadowing.
Exactly. We want to extract all those specific nuances it highlights. Things like dropped sounds, the way words link together, the rhythm.
Rhythm shifts, yeah, to basically give you listening a kind of fast track to understanding what makes natural, fast American English sound like it does.
And crucially, how you can start to maybe incorporate some of that yourself
Yeah.
for, better fluency and hopefully feeling a bit more confident when you speak.
And the source seems pretty convinced about this method.
It makes a strong case, yeah.
Yeah.
It suggests that shadowing, if you do it the right way, is actually one of the best ways to improve in these areas.
Okay, well, let's unpack it then. So, first things first, what exactly is shadowing according to the source?
Okay, so the source defines it pretty simply. It's about listening really intently to a native speaker, or actually any voice you want to sound like,
Uh-huh.
and then immediately repeating exactly what they say, like right after them.
So, like an echo?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
But the key is paying really close attention, not just, to the words themselves, but to the specific sounds within the words,
Okay.
and also the musicality of it, the intonation of the whole sentence.
Right, the ups and downs. And the source we're looking at uses an American speaker.
It does, yeah. The speaker is a native from the U.S., so the whole focus here is squarely on the American accent. If that's the accent you're aiming for, this is, spot on.
Good to know.
And it's quite honest, the source. It says, look, this shadowing thing, it might feel a bit awkward when you first try it, maybe even a little silly.
I can imagine talking along with a recording.
Exactly. But it quickly reassures you, saying that initial feeling is totally normal, and more importantly, the method genuinely works. It helps you internalize those native speech patterns.
That's good to hear because, yeah, that initial hurdle of feeling strange could put people off.
Mm-hmm.
But the emphasis really seems to be on total mimicry, isn't it? The source makes it sound like you're trying to become that speaker for a second.
Absolutely. That's the core idea. You're meant to copy their tone, their speed, their rhythm, even the little pauses they might make.
Everything.
Everything. The source uses the term shadow. You're literally being the speaker's vocal shadow, following every move as closely as you can.
And the idea is that trains your mouth and your ear at the same time.
Precisely. You're hearing it, processing it, and immediately trying to reproduce it. It builds that connection.
Okay, so the technique is clear. Listen close, mimic everything, try and internalize those sounds and rhythms.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned the source uses a specific example, this voicemail script.
Exactly. That voicemail, that little script,
Mm-hmm.
becomes the sort of practical laboratory for applying shadowing.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe more importantly, it's the material the source uses to demonstrate all these subtle features of spoken English we were talking about.
And how does it use the script? It doesn't just, play the whole thing at once.
No, that's key. It breaks it down. The source goes through the voicemail segment by segment.
Okay.
So it'll play or maybe read aloud just a short line or even just a phrase,
Yeah.
and then it stops.
Ah, okay. Little chunks.
Little chunks.
Yeah.
And after each chunk, it highlights something specific, maybe a tricky pronunciation,
Mm-hmm.
or how the intonation works in that bit and wants you to notice it and practice just that.
So it's like a guided analysis. It shows you a small piece, says, hey, notice this sound here, and then lets you focus on repeating that bit.
Exactly. And it's explicitly prompts you. It'll say, okay, now you repeat, or try saying it along with me now, after it explains the point.
I see.
And another important thing the source mentions is flexibility. It encourages you to pause the recording or the practice and just repeat that one tricky phrase as many times as you need to.
That makes sense. You need that repetition to get the muscle memory down, especially for sounds that aren't in your native language.
Absolutely. Mastery, especially with pronunciation, really comes from that focused repetition.
Okay, so we've got the technique shadowing, we've got the material, the voicemail script. Now, the real meat of this deep dive comes from all those specific sound and intonation points the source pulls out of this simple script.
Mhm.
This is where we get to see, how real American English, spoken naturally, actually sounds.
Yeah, this is where the source really delivers, I think. It highlights just how much spoken English, especially when it's fast, can differ from how words look written down, or how you might say them very carefully in isolation.
Right.
It shows us these common patterns reductions, linking between words, intonation contours that really define natural flowing speech.
Okay, so let's break down some of the key things the source points out. Maybe instead of just going line by line through the voicemail right away, we could look at some of the recurring types of changes it highlights, using examples from the script, of course.
That's a great approach. Yeah, synthesize the patterns. So the source definitely identifies several common patterns. One that comes up really early and often is consonant sounds disappearing, or at least being significantly reduced, particularly when they're at the ends of words.
Ah, yes, the disappearing sounds. The source points this out right near the start with the phrase just wanted, doesn't it?
Exactly that one. In Just Wanted, the source notes that the T sound, well, both zero sounds, actually.
Both of them.
Yeah, the one in Just and the one in Wanted. They often aren't really pronounced fully, or sometimes at all, in faster speech. It sounds more like just wand.
Just wand, wow.
Yeah, and this highlights a really key feature the source keeps coming back to. T sounds are frequently dropped or reduced, especially when they occur at the end of a word, or sometimes even in the middle, in everyday American English.
That's a big one. I mean, it totally changes how you'd expect those words to sound if you're just looking at the spelling. And the source brings this up again later, too.
It does, yeah. Reinforces the pattern. When it gets to the phrase, want me, later in the voicemail, it highlights that the T at the end of want is also typically dropped before the M sound in me. So want me becomes more like want me.
Want me. Okay, so it's the same principle. That final T vanishes before the next consonant.
Exactly. The source uses these examples to show it's not just a one-off thing with Just Wanted, but a common sort of rule of thumb for how sounds behave in connected speech. Recognizing that pattern is way more powerful than just memorizing one example.
Definitely. Okay, so disappearing consonants, especially T. What's another common type of change the source points out?
Another big one is how sounds blend together between words. This is often called linking or sometimes elision.
Linking, right? That helps speech flow smoothly, doesn't it? Stops it sounding choppy.
Precisely. And the source gives us a few good examples from the voicemail. One is in the phrase check in and see, but it focuses specifically on how and connects to see.
Okay, check in and see what happens there.
So the source notes that the and sound at the end of and often just falls away before a consonant sound like the ands in C. So it ends up sounding more like check in and see.
And see, so the D is just gone.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Before that consonant. But then contract that with a later sentence. I haven't heard from you in a while. I figured you've been busy. Here the source looks at a while and.
Okay, so this time and is followed by I, which starts with a vowel sound.
Exactly. And that changes everything for the D. The source points out that when and comes before a vowel sound, like the I in I figured, the D doesn't just disappear.
So what does it do?
It links forward. It connects to that vowel sound. So and I becomes more like an I. The D sound is still there, but it attaches to the next word.
Ah, I see. So a while and I sounds like a while and I, with that dad bridging the gap.
That's exactly how the source describes it. It says the D elides with the vowel. It's a perfect illustration of how the sound that comes after a word can change how the end of that word is pronounced. Huge part of making speech sound fluid and fast.
That makes a lot of sense. Are there other examples of this kind of linking the source pulls out?
Yeah, a couple more good ones.
Yeah.
In the question, are we still on for dinner this Friday? It looks at the words still on.
Still on. How do those link up?
The source points out that the IL sound at the end of still, it doesn't stop. It connects directly to the vowel sound, the O sound, at the beginning of on. So it becomes still on.
Still on. Yeah, you can almost hear it as one word there, that a slog where it just carries right over.
It does. A really clear example of sounds blending across word boundaries.
Okay. Any others?
Yes. There's a very, very common reduction involving do you. The source highlights this in the phrase, do you remember?
Oh, yeah. I think I know this one. Does it become like do you or something?
Even more reduced, actually. The source notes that do you very frequently reduces and links together to sound almost like Jew, or maybe Jew.
Do you remember? Or do you remember? Like the J and J.
Yeah, kind of like that sound, Jew remember. The source specifically says, do you elides to Jew. and it's incredibly common in everyday natural speech.
Wow, that's a significant change from do you. It really shows how much words can transform when they're spoken quickly and aren't stressed.
It really does. It's the kind of thing you might not even notice consciously unless someone points it out, but it's happening all the time.
Okay, so we've got disappearing consonants, linking sounds. What else? Does the source talk about vowels changing or whole words getting shorter?
Yes, absolutely. It points at examples of vowel and word reductions, where sounds or even small function words get shortened or their pronunciation changes, usually because they aren't stressed.
Okay, like what?
Well, a classic example is the word to. It shows up in the phrase, wanted to check in.
Wanted to check in. What happens to the to?
The source notes that in fast natural speech, to is very often not pronounced with that full, long ooh vowel sound.
Right, not like to.
Exactly.
Mm.
Instead, it uses a schwa, that super short, relaxed sound.
Ah, the schwa, the classic unstressed vowel.
That's the one. So wanted to check in sounds much more like wanted to check in, or even want to check in sometimes. But the source focuses on the to sound here.
Wanted to check in. Okay, so the source highlights that reduction of to a schwa sound.
It explicitly says it's not always pronounced with the full vowel in rapid conversation. The schwa takes over.
Got it. Any other big word reductions the source points out?
Oh, yes. A fantastic one is the phrase have to.
Have to, like in you have to read it.
Exactly that phrase from the script. This is a great example of how a common phrase can sound completely different from how it's spelled. The source observes that have to is very often pronounced like have to.
Have to? Seriously. Like the word half. H-A-L-F.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Without the V sound in have at all.
Wow.
That's what the source highlights. It says, it's not have with this V sound, but half. It explains this is just a different way of speaking very quickly. It shows how phrases get simplified for speed and efficiency.
So you have to read it becomes you have to read it.
Exactly. You have to read it. That's a huge change in pronunciation,
Yeah.
but it's completely standard in fast, informal speech. It's the kind of detail that really, really makes a difference in sounding natural versus sounding like you're reading.
Absolutely. That's a game changer for learners to know.
And one more related to word reductions, maybe slightly more informal, but incredibly common, is what happens with give me.
Ah, does it become gimme?
Precisely. The source uses the example phrase, just give me a call, from the script. And it notes that give me is very frequently reduced down to gimme. It says something like, it's not overpronounced, but gimme. It's a contraction you hear constantly.
Give me a call. Yeah, saying give me really distinctly there would sound almost robotic or overly formal.
Right. It would stand out. Gimme is just the natural way to say it in that context.
Okay, interesting. So we've covered sounds disappearing, linking, vowel reductions, word reductions. Does the source talk about word endings specifically? Like ing or ed?
It does, yeah. It draws our attention to how common word endings can change sound, focusing specifically on those two, ing and ed endings.
Okay, let's take ing first. It uses the phrase how you're doing, right?
That's the one. And it highlights a very, very common reduction here. The ing sound at the end of doing, that sound you make at the back of your throat, is often shortened to just an in sound. So doing becomes doing.
How you're doing? Just dropping that final G sound at the ing.
Essentially, yeah, that's the observation. The source states something like, often we'll shorten ing endings to n. It's a clear marker of natural, often less formal speech. Not always, but very often.
Doing. Got it. And what about the in ending? That one can be kind of tricky because it doesn't always sound the same, does it?
It really doesn't. And the source gives examples to illustrate exactly that point. It uses two different words from the script that both end in AE.
Okay, which ones?
First, the word mentioned, as in the book you mentioned. The source notes that here, the ed ending has a clear D sound. Mentioned. D.
Okay, mentioned ends with D. Makes sense.
But then, right after it looks at the word finished, as in I finally finished it. And the source points out that the ed ending here has a T sound. Finished. T.
Ah, so same spelling, EE, but completely different sounds. Mentioned ends in D, finished ends in T.
Exactly. And the source explicitly notes this difference. It also points out that, honestly, with ed endings, there isn't one simple rule that covers everything easily. Often, you kind of just have to know or memorize which sound applies to which word.
So listening and shadowing really helps there because you hear the correct sound used naturally.
Precisely. Shadowing helps you hear and internalize those specific cases, like mentioned D versus finished T, without getting bogged down in complex phonological rules.
Okay, that covers a lot of ground on individual sounds and word changes. But shadowing isn't just about sounds, right? The source also mentioned intonation.
Oh, definitely. The source puts quite a lot of emphasis on intonation. The melody or the musical pitch changes across a sentence. This is crucial for sounding natural and conveying meaning.
Where does it start with intonation?
It starts right at the very beginning with the first line of the voicemail. Hey, it's me.
Simple phrase. What does it say about the intonation there?
It uses this simple phrase to establish a basic, common pattern for statements in English. It notes that the intonation generally rises a little bit at the beginning or through the middle of the sentence, and then it falls at the very end.
Like, hey, rise, it's me, fall.
Exactly that kind of contour. A general rise-fall shape for making a statement. And the source points this out again later in a much longer statement, doesn't it?
Does it? Which one?
The sentence, I haven't heard from you in a while, and I figured you've been busy.
Ah, okay. That's a longer thought.
Right. And the source highlights that even in this longer sentence, the same basic intonation pattern holds. It generally rises through the first part of the thought, I haven't heard from you in a while, and then clearly falls at the very end, figured you've been busy. It shows it's a characteristic pattern for completing a thought or statement.
Okay, so statements typically fall at the end. But what about questions? The pattern must change there.
It does, and the source shows this contrast clearly using the question from the script. Are we still on for dinner this Friday?
Right, that's definitely a question. How does the intonation work?
Because it's a yes-no question, the source notes the intonation does the opposite of a statement. It rises at the end. Are we still on for dinner this Friday? The pitch goes noticeably up on Friday.
Friday. Yeah, I can hear that lift. That rising pitch at the end is a key signal that you're asking, not telling.
Exactly. The source makes a great point by directly contrasting that rising question intonation with the falling statement intonation. Using these specific examples from the script, it makes the difference really clear.
Are there any other intonation points it makes?
Yeah, one more subtle but interesting one. It looks at the phrase, oh, and one more thing.
Oh, and one more thing, like when you're adding an afterthought.
Right. And the source connects the way this phrase is often said, almost like an exclamation sometimes, to the use of a slightly higher overall intonation or pitch level here.
So, spoken with a bit more energy.
Yeah, maybe a bit higher pitch than the statements around it. Oh, and one more thing. It suggests the intonation itself adds a feeling of emphasis or draws attention to the fact that something new or extra is being added to the conversation.
Interesting. So intonation isn't just about statements versus questions, but also about adding nuance like that.
Definitely. And related to that nuance is the final major area the source touches on, word emphasis or stress. Which words get highlighted in a sentence to really convey the core meaning?
Okay, word stress. Which sentence does it use for this?
It uses the sentence, I found this great Italian place downtown and I think you'll love it.
Long sentence. What gets stress?
The source highlights that native speakers don't just say all words equally, they naturally emphasize certain key words. In this case, it notes the likely emphasis would fall on great Italian place, maybe downtown, and think you'll love it.
Great Italian place, downtown. Love it. Okay, and why those words? What's the logic?
The source explains that the emphasis tells the listener what information is most important or new. Stressing great Italian place highlights that it's not just any place, but a good one, and specifically Italian.
Right.
Stressing downtown highlights the location, which might be relevant information. And stressing think you'll love it conveys the speaker's strong feeling or prediction about the listener's enjoyment.
So the stress directs the listener's attention to the key pieces of information the speaker wants to convey. It's not random.
Not at all. It's fundamental to clear communication.
Ah.
The source uses this example to show how stress works naturally to guide understanding.
Wow. Okay, it really is fascinating how much is going on beneath the surface of just, a simple voicemail message.
Isn't it? The source does a great job of pulling out all these specific points, the drop sounds, the linking, the reductions, the intonation, the stress from just that one short text.
It really demonstrates that natural American English isn't just about pronouncing individual words correctly in isolation.
Not at all. It's so much about how those words connect, how they change in the flow of speech, and how the melody and emphasis add these crucial layers of meaning and, well, naturalness. These features are everywhere in spoken language.
And the shadowing technique as the source presents it, is basically the tool to help you learn these things implicitly by mimicking a model who uses them naturally and effortlessly.
That's the idea. By constantly repeating after the native speaker model who is using these dropped T's, these linked sounds like an I, these schwa vowels, these intonation patterns, you start to train your own mouth, your vocal muscles, and also your ear to recognize and produce them more automatically.
So after breaking down all these individual nuances, piece by piece, phrase by phrase, the source then moves to a final step in the practice, right? Using the whole script.
Yes. Once it's gone through all the detail analysis and practice of the small chunks, the final step recommended by the source is to practice the entire voicemail script all the way through.
Okay, the whole thing in one go.
Right. The source suggests the final step is to actually read along or shadow the complete voicemail script without stopping, trying to incorporate all the things you've just analyzed and practiced in those smaller segments.
And what's the main purpose of that final, full run-through, according to the source?
Well, it gives a couple of main reasons. The first one is really about practicing overall fluency.
Ah, putting it all together.
Exactly. It's where you try to weave all those individual details, the linking, the reductions, the intonation, into one smooth, continuous flow of speech, just like the original speaker, integrating the pieces into the whole performance, so to speak.
Makes sense. You practice the parts, then you practice the whole piece.
And the second purpose the source mentions is more practical, really.
Yeah.
It basically provides a complete continuous audio track or a section of the practice that you, the learner, can easily return to anytime.
Oh, I see. So you can just hit play and practice shadowing the entire script whenever you want without having to listen to all the explanations again.
Exactly. It creates a dedicated practice loop for the whole text. So the overall structure is understand the elements in the small chunks, practice those elements, then practice putting it all together with the full script, and then you can repeat that full practice as often as needed to reinforce everything.
That's a really solid learning cycle. Analyze, practice parts, practice whole, repeat.
Yeah, it's structured quite effectively.
Okay, so let's try and sum up the key takeaways we've pulled from this source. The big one seems to be that shadowing is presented as a really effective, powerful technique for boosting your English pronunciation, your fluency, and even your confidence.
Yes, definitely. And it achieves that, according to the source, by guiding you to meticulously mimic native speech, paying super close attention to those subtle but absolutely crucial patterns of the American accent that we've spent time deep diving into, using that voicemail as our example.
Right, by pointing out every specific sound change. You know, the teats that vanish, the two becoming two, the way NI links together, the deet sound on mention, but the T sound on finished, the different intonation for statements and questions, where the stress falls. The source basically provides a clear map. It tells you exactly what you should be listening for and gives you a method for how to start making those sounds and rhythms part of your own speech.
It offers a really tangible path, I think, towards sounding more like a native speaker. And it's not based on just learning abstract phonetics rules, but on actively training yourself through mimicry to produce the actual sounds and patterns used in real everyday conversation.
Yeah, it feels much more practical. It equips you with both the knowledge, here's what's happening, and the method shadowing to move beyond just getting the words right and start getting the sound, the flow, the music of natural speech right.
You mentioned confidence earlier. That's such an important outcome the source seems to aim for.
Right.
The idea is the more you feel like the sounds and rhythms you're producing actually align with what you hear from native speakers all around you, the more comfortable and, frankly, less hesitant you're likely to feel when you actually have to speak.
Absolutely. It kind of closes that gap, doesn't it, between how you think you sound or how you want to sound and how you actually sound. Reducing that gap has got to boost confidence.
Exactly. It reduces that feeling of sounding foreign or stiff, which can be a major confidence killer for language learners.
And the way the source structures it, breaking down this complex thing, natural speech, into manageable parts first, before asking you to tackle the whole script. That makes the task feel much less overwhelming, I imagine.
Oh, for sure. The idea of perfectly mimicking a whole paragraph right off the bat could be really intimidating.
Yeah.
But breaking it down phrase by phrase, focusing on one or two features at a time, makes it feel achievable. It's classic effective learning, really.
Yeah.
Analyze the complex system by looking at its components, practice those components individually, then gradually build it back up to the whole system.
And the core activity itself, that consistent listening and repeating that defines shadowing in this source, It's doing two jobs at once, isn't it?
Mhm.
It's sharpening your listening skills while also refining your speaking muscles.
That's a great way to put it. It creates this direct feedback loop between accurately hearing the sound and then physically being able to produce it. That loop is just invaluable for improving pronunciation and fluency together.
So, by really focusing on all the specific details, the source highlighted the dropped T in just, the schwa for two, the linking in still on, the rising intonation on questions, the reduction of give me to gimme, have to have. You're not just randomly repeating, you're engaging in deep, focused practice.
You're actively training your auditory system to catch these nuances and your vocal apparatus, your tongue, your lips, your vocal cords to handle the complexity and speed of natural, connected American English.
And having that native speaker model right there in the source material, the one reading the voicemail, provides that clear, consistent target to aim for.
Exactly. That voicemail script isn't just random text. It becomes the practical exercise ground where all these linguistic features are demonstrated in context.
It really is quite remarkable when you break it down like this, how much linguistic detail and learning potential the source manages to extract from just one short, simple piece of audio.
It is. It reveals the rich complexity hidden within seemingly simple everyday sentences. Things we native speakers do without thinking, but learners need to consciously notice and practice.
It really underscores that significant difference between, careful written language or even very slow, deliberate speech, and the reality of how language sounds when spoken fluidly and quickly.
Absolutely. And the source's detailed breakdown effectively acts as a bridge across that gap for the learner.
And it gives you a concrete, actionable strategy, the shadowing technique, to actively work on reducing that gap in your own spoken English.
Mhm.
Not just theory, but practice.
Right. So you walk away with the core technique, a method for breaking it down and practicing effectively, and a very clear, realistic example loaded with specific target points that the source has already identified for you.
It's almost like a mini course in practical American phonology delivered through a single, straightforward exercise.
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
And it empowers the learner, too, I think, by demystifying some of these sounds and patterns that might otherwise just seem like fast, blurry, indecipherable noise.
Yeah, instead of just hearing mumble, mumble, you start to hear, that was a drop T, or okay, that was NI linking together.
Exactly. It shows you precisely what's happening under the hood of fast speech.
Well, this deep dive into the source material certainly makes a very compelling case for why shadowing, when it's approached with this kind of focused attention to detail, could be such a powerful tool for learners.
I agree. It transforms shadowing from what might seem like just mindless repetition into a very mindful, analytical form of mimicry. One that's focused specifically on capturing those rhythms, reductions, and connections that are the hallmarks of natural speech.
And using a simple voicemail, something so ordinary, makes it instantly relatable, doesn't it? It's exactly the kind of language you actually need to understand and potentially produce in real life, outside of a textbook or a formal classroom setting.
Totally. It grounds the whole technique in practical, everyday communication needs.
So it seems like for anyone out there who's really dedicated to improving their American accent, their overall fluency, maybe feeling more confident, this source provides both the why, showing you what makes natural speech sound the way it does, and a very detailed how through that breakdown of the voicemail example.
It certainly gives you a solid starting point and a method for incorporating focused shadowing into your language learning routine. And it helps you prioritize by pointing out some of the most common and impactful features to listen for and imitate.
All right, well, I think we've thoroughly unpacked this source and its guide to using shadowing for American English pronunciation and fluency. We've covered the technique itself, how the source suggests structuring the practice with that voicemail script example, and we've really tried to dig into every specific nuance the source highlighted.
Yeah, from those dropped consonants like T and D, the vowel reductions like the schwa and tu, the way sounds link across words like an I or still on, the different sounds of ed endings.
Right, and the intonation patterns, the difference between statements falling and questions rising, and even how word emphasis directs meaning.
It's clear the source very effectively uses that single short voicemail as a vehicle to demonstrate a really wide range of common features you hear constantly in natural American speech.
Yeah, and in doing so, it makes that strong case for shadowing as a practical way to internalize these patterns yourself.
It really does. It helps take what might just sound like, as you said, fast, blurry noise and helps you identify the distinct, predictable sound changes and connections that are actually happening underneath. It gives you a decoder ring in a way.
A decoder ring for fast speech. I like that.
Okay, so thinking about everything we've just discussed, all based on this one source, here's maybe a final thought to leave you, the listener, with.
Okay.
How does paying this kind of really close attention to all these subtle sound changes, the dropped T's, the linking D's, the reduced hafta, the ing becoming in, how does focusing on producing those sounds affect not just how you speak American English, but how you actually hear native speakers when they're talking in everyday conversations? Does this deeper understanding of the production side actually change your listening comprehension too?
Ooh, that's a really interesting connection to make. Because that link between producing sounds accurately and understanding them when you hear them from others, it's incredibly powerful, isn't it?
It seems like it would be.
Yeah, often improving your own speaking in this detailed way almost automatically makes you a better, more attuned listener. It's like it gives you a new filter for listening. Maybe sounds or connections that you might have just glossed over or misinterpreted before. Suddenly they become clearer because now you understand the underlying pattern or the reduction that's happening.
Precisely. You start decoding rapid speech more effectively, more accurately, because you're already aware of these common shortcuts and sound changes that happen naturally when people speak at a normal pace. You recognize them.
So by deep diving into how to make these sounds yourself through shadowing, you might, as a side effect, also be deep diving into how to better perceive and understand those same sounds when they're flying at you from other speakers.
Absolutely. The source's primary focus is definitely on the production side, on improving your speech through shadowing. But the positive implications for improving your listening comprehension skills are almost certainly a fascinating and very valuable side effect.
Something to consider, perhaps, as you put this technique, this detailed shadowing approach, into practice.